100 years. That is how long the same three countries ran the entire car industry. Germany, Japan, America. These were not just car companies. They were the backbone of entire nations. Millions of jobs, trillions of dollars. Families built their whole lives around these factories. And then, almost overnight, something happened that nobody saw coming. A company that most people had never heard of walked in and started destroying everything. Not slowly, not carefully. Fast, brutally fast. The kind of speed that leaves no time to react. The kind of destruction that looks like a natural disaster more than a business story. What you are about to see is not a success story. It is a warning. Porsche lost 92% of its profits in a single year. Think about that number. Not 2%, not 20%, 92. A brand that rich people all over the world dream about. A brand that charges $100,000 for a single car. Gone. Almost completely wiped out in 12 months. Mercedes watched their profits fall by 28%. Stellantis, the company that owns Jeep and Chrysler and Fiat, reported a loss of $26 billion. $26 billion. That is not a bad quarter. That is a collapse. Volkswagen, a company so important to Germany that politicians treat it like a national treasure, announced it would cut 15,000 jobs inside Germany, the home country. Something is very, very wrong. The company doing this damage was, until very recently, completely unknown outside of China. In 2003, it was just a small battery factory, not a car company, a battery factory. The man who built it, Wang Chuanfu, told everyone that batteries would replace engines one day. People laughed at him. Elon Musk, the most famous electric car person in the world, went on television and mocked him publicly. But Wang Chuanfu kept building, kept investing, kept going when nobody believed in him. And now his company, BYD, is doing something that has not happened in over a century. It is rewriting the rules of one of the most powerful industries on the planet. And the people being destroyed by it did not see it coming until it was already too late. To understand why BYD is winning, you have to understand how traditional car companies are built. They do not make everything themselves. They buy parts from hundreds of different suppliers, brakes from one company, screens from another, chips from factories in Taiwan or South Korea. This system worked fine for decades, but it also means that every time a supplier has a problem, the car company has a problem. In 2021, the world ran out of computer chips. Factories everywhere shut down. Ford, Toyota, GM. They all had to stop production because they could not get the tiny chips they needed. It cost them billions. BYD did not have that problem. Because BYD makes its own chips. It makes almost everything itself. That one decision changed everything. The strategy is called vertical integration. It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. Instead of buying parts from other companies, you make the parts yourself. BYD makes its own batteries, its own motors, its own computer chips, its own glass, its own headlights, its own software. When you control everything inside your own factory, something powerful happens. You cut out all the middlemen. Every company that used to take a profit from selling BYD a part, BYD now keeps that money for itself. The cost of making a car drops dramatically. And when your cost goes down, you can charge customers less and still make money. This is how BYD started selling electric cars at prices that seemed impossible. Prices that European and Japanese companies simply could not match. Not even close. The battery is the most important part. BYD understood this before anyone else did. They did not just make batteries, they invented a completely new kind of battery called the blade battery. It uses a chemistry called LFP, which stands for lithium iron phosphate. This type of battery is cheaper to make than the batteries Tesla and other companies use. It is also safer. It does not catch fire as easily. And BYD made it so well that other car companies started buying it from them, including Tesla. Think about that. Tesla, the most famous electric car company in the world, buys batteries from BYD. The student became the teacher. The laughingstock became the supplier. And this battery technology locked BYD into a position of power that competitors could not easily break. While European companies were rushing to go fully electric, BYD made a very smart move. They noticed something important. Most people in the world do not live near charging stations. People in Thailand, people in Brazil, people in rural China, people in the Middle East. These customers want an electric car, but they are scared of running out of power with nowhere to charge. So BYD offered them something called a plug-in hybrid, half electric, half gasoline. You can charge it at home for short trips, but if you are driving somewhere far, the gasoline engine kicks in. No anxiety, no problem. This was not a compromise. This was a strategy. BYD used hybrids to sell millions of cars in markets that were not yet ready for full electric. They got the scale first. Then they converted customers later. Thailand is a perfect example of what BYD does to a market. Japan spent 40 years building its car business in Thailand. Toyota, Honda, Mitsubishi. These brands were everywhere. Thai families trusted them. Thai mechanics knew how to fix them. The roads were full of Japanese cars. Then BYD arrived. Within 18 months, BYD captured 40% of the electric vehicle market in Thailand. 40% in 18 months. Mitsubishi closed its factory. Mazda cut production by 60%. Factories that employed thousands of Thai workers started shutting down or scaling back. This was not a gradual change. This was a shock, a strategic shock. Japan had taken decades to build that dominance. BYD took it apart in less time than it takes a child to finish primary school. Brazil told a similar story. BYD went into Brazil and within 1 year captured 72% of the electric vehicle market. 72%. Almost the entire market in 1 year. They did not even build their own factory from scratch. Ford had already given up on Brazil and abandoned their old factory. BYD moved in and took it over. They hired local workers. They started building cars right there. This is part of what makes BYD so dangerous to compete against. They move fast. They adapt fast. They find the gaps that other companies leave behind when they retreat, and they fill those gaps immediately. Like water filling every crack in a stone wall. And once they are inside a market, once people are buying their cars and trusting their brand, it becomes very difficult to push them out. Europe was supposed to be different. European customers are sophisticated. They value quality and heritage. Audi, BMW, Mercedes. These brands stand for something. Engineering pride, decades of reputation. European consumers would never choose a Chinese car over a German one. That was the assumption. The assumption was wrong. BYD now holds more than 11% of the electric vehicle market in Europe, and that number grows every quarter. Renault, the famous French car company, posted its first net loss in 5 years. Audi is losing market share in its own home country. The continent that gave the world the automobile is now watching a Chinese company take pieces of its market, one city at a time. The pride is gone. The panic is setting in. The only major market where BYD cannot freely compete is the United States. America put up a wall of tariffs to keep Chinese cars out. Very high taxes on imports. This made BYD vehicles too expensive for American buyers. So, for now, the American market is protected. But people who study trade and economics will tell you this protection has a time limit. BYD is already building factories in Mexico. They are getting closer. They are patient. And the strategies they are using in Europe, Thailand, Brazil, and the Middle East are all being refined and perfected. Every market they enter teaches them something new. By the time they find a way into America, they will have more experience than any car company has ever had in the history of global expansion. The wall will not hold forever. Now we need to talk about the part of this story that nobody in the financial press wants to explain clearly. Because what BYD has accomplished is not purely the result of great engineering or brilliant strategy. There is a third ingredient. And this ingredient is the reason traditional car companies cannot simply copy what BYD did. Between 2015 and 2020 alone, the Chinese government gave BYD approximately $4.3 billion in direct subsidies. $4.3 billion. Just in direct payments. And this does not count the free land for factories, the loans from state banks at zero interest, the guaranteed government contracts to buy buses and taxis, the tax breaks on research and development. When you add all of this together, you begin to understand why BYD's prices seem impossible to match. Here is the reframe that changes everything you think you know about this story. BYD is not a private company winning in a free market. BYD is a weapon built and funded by the Chinese government to destroy the car industries of other nations. In 2016, the money BYD received from the government was larger than the company's entire profit for that year. That means without the government money, BYD would have been a loss-making company. It would have been failing. But it kept going. Because the Chinese government needed it to keep going. This is not capitalism. This is not fair competition. This is a country deciding to target an entire global industry and funding a company to demolish it. The car companies fighting BYD are not fighting a competitor. They are fighting a nation. For every car BYD sells, experts estimate that somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 of government money is embedded in the price. It is not visible. It does not appear on the sticker, but it is there. Inside the cheap land the factory was built on, inside the interest-free loans that financed the machines, inside the tax breaks that kept profits higher than they should have been. When a German engineer sits down and tries to figure out how to match BYD's price, they cannot do it. Not because they are bad engineers, not because they are inefficient, but because the German company is playing by the rules of business, while BYD is playing by the rules of national strategy. These are two completely different games. You cannot win at chess if your opponent is playing a different game entirely. The most dangerous part of this government strategy is timing. The Chinese government is now slowly reducing the subsidies. People might think that is good news. It is not. The subsidies are being reduced because the plan already worked. BYD has already taken over critical parts of the global supply chain. Their batteries are inside vehicles made by other companies. Their factories are operating in multiple continents. Their brand is established. Their customer base is loyal. The machine is already running on its own momentum. Removing the subsidies now is like removing the scaffolding from a building that has already been finished. The building stands on its own. The scaffolding was only ever needed during construction. The construction is done. The damage is done. China has a plan called Made in China 2025, and the car industry is just one chapter of it. The plan identifies specific industries where China wants to dominate the world: electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, aerospace, batteries, robotics. In every one of these industries, China is doing the same thing it did with BYD. Find the best domestic company, give it massive government support, help it undercut global competitors on price, wait for foreign companies to collapse or retreat, then control the supply chain for the entire world. The car industry is not the end of this story. It is the proof of concept, the test run that showed the strategy works. Other industries are next, and most of them are not ready. Now, here is the prediction that should keep business leaders awake at night. The industries named in China's 15th five-year plan are not random choices. They are the industries that every major economy depends on. Energy storage, computing, transportation, communication. If China achieves dominance in all of these at once, the economic power of Western nations and Japan would diminish in ways that have no historical comparison. We have never seen one country take strategic control of this many critical global supply chains simultaneously. The car industry felt like a local problem when it started. Now it is clearly something much larger. BYD is not the story. BYD is the first chapter. The full book has barely been opened yet, and what is inside it should concern every government on the planet. But now we need to slow down, because there is another side to this story. BYD looks powerful from the outside. The sales numbers look amazing. The global expansion looks unstoppable. But underneath that shiny surface, independent financial investigators have found something that looks deeply troubling. Something that reminds experts of another Chinese company you may have heard of, Evergrande, the property giant that collapsed in 2021 and sent shockwaves through the entire Chinese economy. The patterns are similar, the warning signs are the same, and if BYD has the same problems that Evergrande had, then the most dramatic part of this story has not even happened yet. A Hong Kong research firm called GMT Research has done a deep investigation into BYD's actual financial situation. What they found is alarming. The official debt number that BYD reports publicly is approximately 42 billion yuan. But GMT Research estimates the real debt is closer to 323 billion yuan. That is 8 times larger than the official number. 8 times. If this is true, it means BYD's balance sheet is a fiction. It means the company's real financial health is completely hidden from outside investors. It means the profits being celebrated in headlines are not telling the whole story. This is called off-balance sheet debt, and it is exactly the kind of financial trick that brought Evergrande down when investors finally discovered the truth. The most visible sign of financial stress inside BYD is how they treat their suppliers. Normal manufacturing companies pay their suppliers within 50 to 60 days. That is the standard. That is what the industry considers healthy and professional. BYD pays its suppliers in 275 days. That is 9 months, almost a full year. Think about what this means for a small supplier that depends on BYD. They deliver parts to BYD today. They will not receive payment until next September. Meanwhile, they have to pay their own workers. They have to buy their own materials. They have to keep their own lights on. So these suppliers go to banks and borrow money to survive while they wait. They are essentially giving BYD a 9-month interest-free loan. BYD is using their suppliers as a bank, and it is not paying any interest. This system works as long as BYD keeps growing. As long as suppliers believe BYD will eventually pay them, they keep delivering parts. They keep accepting the 9-month wait. But what happens if BYD's sales slow down? What happens if the growth story stops? Suddenly, those suppliers start to worry. And if enough suppliers start demanding faster payment, or if they simply cannot afford to keep waiting, the whole supply chain can break. When the supply chain breaks, production stops. When production stops, sales stop. When sales stop, the debt that was hidden under the surface becomes very visible. This is exactly what happened with Evergrande. The machine kept spinning as long as new money kept coming in. The moment the new money slowed, everything fell apart almost instantly. The question is whether BYD is closer to that moment than anyone realizes. Then there is the question of the sales numbers themselves. BYD announced that it sold 4,250,000 vehicles in 2024. That is an enormous number. But investigators and journalists who went to look at the actual evidence found something that does not add up. Across China, in large open fields and parking lots, thousands of brand-new BYD vehicles are sitting unused, not being driven, not being delivered to customers, just sitting, rusting, with 0 kilometers on the odometer. How did these vehicles get counted in the sales numbers if no real customer ever bought them? The answer is a practice called channel stuffing. Here is how it works. At the end of every month, BYD needs to hit its sales targets. These targets are what investors and journalists look at. So to make the numbers look good, BYD dealers register vehicles under the names of shell companies and partner businesses. These vehicles are officially counted as sold. The numbers go up. The headlines say BYD sold a record number of cars. But no real person drove that car home. No real customer bought it. A salesperson in Guangzhou was recorded admitting that he registers 200 to 300 cars under partner company names every single month, just to make the targets. These cars then appear on resale markets as used vehicles with 0 kilometers. The sales numbers are, at least in part, a performance, not a reality. The quality problems are also becoming impossible to ignore. In China, when BYD launched a new SUV called the Sea Lion, customers flooded social media with complaints. In just 1 week, more than 5,000 complaints were posted. Electrical systems failing, GPS giving wrong directions, windshield wipers stopping during rain. These are not small issues. These are safety problems. BYD has also issued multiple massive recalls. In September 2024, approximately 97,000 vehicles were recalled because of a defect in the steering column that could cause electrical shorts and fire. Then, in October 2025, another 115,000 vehicles were recalled for a separate structural problem. 2 massive recalls within 13 months. This is not normal for a healthy, well-run car company. The situation in Brazil added another dimension of damage to BYD's reputation. When BYD was building its new factory in the state of Bahia, Brazilian labor authorities discovered conditions inside the construction site that they described as similar to modern slavery. 163 Chinese workers had their passports confiscated. They could not leave. They were working 14-hour days with no breaks allowed, no freedom of movement. The Brazilian government launched legal proceedings against BYD. The story made international news and reached the office of Brazil's president. This is not the image of a clean, responsible, modern company building a green future. This is the image of a company that will do anything and sacrifice anyone to move faster and keep costs low. And the world noticed. When you add it all together, the picture changes dramatically. The official story says BYD is a miracle, a scrappy Chinese startup that out-innovated the best car companies in the world through sheer brilliance. But the real story is more complicated. Government money worth billions every year. Debt that may be 8 times larger than officially stated. Suppliers being treated as forced lenders. Sales numbers inflated by empty registrations. quality problems resulting in hundreds of thousands of recalls, workers in foreign countries subjected to conditions that were deemed illegal. This is not the story of a company that earned its place through fair competition. This is the story of a system built on leverage, deception, and the willingness to pay costs that should never have been acceptable. So, what happens next? In 2025, BYD's net profit fell by 19%. This is the first meaningful reversal after years of explosive growth. In January 2026, global sales fell by 41% compared to the same month the previous year. 41% in 1 month. Domestic Chinese competitors like Geely are now fighting back hard. The market is getting crowded. The prices that BYD could charge are being pushed lower and lower by rivals. Meanwhile, the hidden debts, the supplier pressure, the quality problems, and the retreating government subsidies are all hitting at the same time. Each one of these problems alone would be manageable. All of them together at the same time is a very different situation. The scaffolding is gone. The building is being tested for the first time without any support. The traditional car companies watching all of this have a choice to make. Some of them are still hoping that BYD will collapse on its own. They are waiting for the Evergrande moment. But waiting is not a strategy. Because even if BYD does collapse, the damage is already done. The factories in Brazil are built. The market share in Thailand is captured. The supply chains are disrupted. The pricing expectations of customers have been permanently reset. People who bought a BYD for $20,000 are not going to go back and pay $40,000 for a European equivalent. The new normal is the new normal. And the companies that refuse to accept this new reality and adapt to it will not survive long enough to see whatever happens to BYD. The experts who study this situation say there are 3 things that every business leader and every government needs to understand right now. First, you cannot compete with a nation using only the tools of a company. When a government is subsidizing your competitor to the tune of billions of dollars, you need your own government in the conversation. This is no longer purely a business problem. Second, do not trust the published numbers. The sales figures, the debt figures, the profit figures from BYD have all been called into serious question by independent investigators. Any strategy built on these numbers is built on sand. Third, the labor and quality problems are not just moral issues. They are business vulnerabilities. In a world where customers and regulators are paying attention, companies that cut corners on safety and human rights carry enormous hidden risk. Here is what this all comes down to. BYD changed the car industry forever. That is already done. It cannot be undone. But the question of whether BYD itself survives the next decade is completely open. The same speed that made it powerful also created instability that is only now becoming visible. And the Chinese government strategy that launched BYD is already being applied to the next set of industries: semiconductors, artificial intelligence, robotics. The car story is over. The next war has already started. The companies and governments that understand what actually happened with BYD, not the headline version, But the real version are the ones that have any chance of being ready for what is coming. Everyone else is still celebrating a race that ended 3 years ago, while the next one is already in its final lap.